7 years, that's how long she bled for him. Not metaphorically, but literally, with her body, her grief, her silence. Luna Serena Vale built the most feared pack in the Northern Territories with her bare hands and her unbreakable loyalty, and the night she lost their child alone in the dark, her alpha was upstairs clinking goblets with the woman who ordered the attack. This is not a love story about forgiveness. This is about what happens when a woman stops waiting to be saved and decides the entire kingdom needs to answer for what it did. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my pack is watching from tonight. Hosam. The banquet hall smelled like wood smoke, roasted boar, and victory. Serena could smell it even 3 floors below, even through the iron-barred window that faced the inner courtyard, where the torches burned gold and the drums had been going for 2 hours straight. She could hear the laughter, male voices rough with drink, women's voices bright and sharpened for performance. The specific register of celebration that a pack makes when it believes it has won something clean and permanent. She pressed her back against the stone wall and breathed through her nose. The cell was 12 feet by 10. She had measured it the first night by walking the perimeter with her hands on the wall, counting her steps, because doing something methodical was the only way to stop herself from screaming. The floor was bare stone, uneven in places, slick near the drain in the corner. The smell was old water and rust, and something biological that she had stopped trying to identify. A single torch burned in the corridor outside, visible only as a thin blade of orange light under the door. She had been here for 11 hours. The chains on her wrists were the formal kind, hammered iron links with a keeper bolt driven into the wall above her, so she could sit or stand but not reach the door. Her left hand was still wrapped in the cloth she'd torn from her own underskirt. The cloth soaked through now, dark and stiff. The healer had not come. No one had come except the guard who shoved water and a heel of bread through the slot at the bottom of the door 6 hours ago, and even he had not spoken. He had just pushed the bread through and left, his boots scraping the floor. Serena ate the bread. That was the thing about her that most people in this castle had never understood, even after 7 years. They expected weeping. They expected the Luna on her knees with her face in her hands, undone by betrayal, waiting for someone to come and fix it. That was the woman they thought they knew. The careful, composed Luna who walked 3 steps behind her alpha at council sessions and chose her words like she was choosing which stones to step on crossing a river. The woman who smiled at visiting alphas and remembered the names of their children and never showed her teeth unless Darius needed someone to bleed. What they had never understood was that the care was the weapon, not the vulnerability. Every piece of steadiness she had ever performed in this castle had been work, the kind of work that left calluses you couldn't see. She ate the bread, she drank the water, she sat down against the wall with her back straight and her chained hands resting in her lap, and she started thinking. It began 3 days before the rogue attack, though she had not recognized it as a beginning at the time. Vanessa Draven had arrived at Thornhold 8 months ago as the appointed emissary from the Draven estate, a mid-tier bloodline with excellent land holdings and a reputation for producing beautiful women who understood political utility. Serena had noted her arrival with the calm, measured attention she gave to all new variables in the castle. She had assessed Vanessa the way she assessed everything, directly, without flinching, filing the information in the part of her mind where she kept things that required watching. Vanessa was 23, Serena was 29. The math was not subtle. What Serena had not factored correctly was Darius. She had spent 7 years understanding this man down to the grain. She knew which silences meant fury and which meant calculation. She knew the exact point in a negotiation where he would stop being patient and start being dangerous. She knew that he slept on his left side when troubled and his right side when content, and that the only time he was ever genuinely frightened was when something threatened the pack's long-term stability rather than its immediate strength. She had known him. Except that in the 8 months since Vanessa arrived, something in the architecture of Darius Thorn had shifted in a way that Serena had seen, but refused to name correctly. She had called it distraction. She had called it stress from the eastern border disputes. She had called it the particular flatness that comes over powerful men when they spend too long in rooms without enough air, making decisions that cost too many lives. She had not called it what it was, so she had done what she always did when Darius pulled inward. She worked harder. She increased her rounds with the Border Scouts. She sat through 3 additional council sessions per week. She managed the grain distribution dispute with the Harker settlements herself, rather than delegating it, riding out in the rain for 4 consecutive days until the matter was resolved. She came back to the castle mud-soaked and hoarse, and went directly into a meeting about the eastern fortifications without changing her boots. Darius had not asked where she'd been. 3 nights before the rogue attack, she had come to his study to review the border reports. She had done this every week for 6 years. He was standing at the window, hands behind his back, looking out at the training grounds below. "You don't have to bring these yourself," he said, without turning. "Send Aldrich." She set the reports on his desk. "I've always brought them myself." Things change. She watched the back of his head, the particular set of his shoulders, which she had learned to read the way she read weather, the angle that meant restraint, the angle that meant dismissal. "Darius." "Leave it, Serena." "I won't." He turned then, and she saw it. Not for the first time, but for the first time she let herself fully see it. His expression was not angry, it was not guilty. It was the blank, clean face of a man who had already made a decision and was waiting for the formalities to conclude. Her stomach dropped. "Something has happened," she said, "or is happening, and you've decided I'm not part of the conversation where that gets resolved." I said leave it. You've said that to enemies in council sessions. You've said it to border commanders who wanted to argue tactics after the decision was already made. She kept her voice level. She had practiced this tone for so long it lived in her chest now, a permanent inhabitant. "Don't say it to me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back out the window. "Go rest," he said. "You've been riding in the rain for 4 days. You look like hell." She left. She did not sleep. She lay in her room, their room technically, though he had barely used it in 2 months, and stared at the ceiling and catalogued every piece of evidence she had been carefully misfiling for 8 months, and rearranged it into the shape it had always actually been. By morning, she had made a decision of her own. She went to find Elder Orrin. Orrin was 81, half-blind, and the only person in Thornhold who had been alive long enough to remember the pack before Darius's father built it into a territorial power. He lived in 3 rooms near the archive tower, and spent his days organizing historical records that no one else touched. Serena had spent considerable effort over 7 years building a relationship with him, not because she expected it to be useful, but because she was the kind of woman who paid attention to what everyone else ignored. "You look worse than usual," Orrin said when she appeared in his doorway. "I need to ask you something about the Northern Bloodline records." He squinted at her. "Does the Alpha know you're here? Does it matter?" He was quiet for a moment, then he stepped back and let her in. She was there for 4 hours. When she left, she had not yet found what she was looking for, but she had found enough to know it existed. Something in the older records, something cross-referenced in the founding histories, and then apparently expunged from the main archive, about a bloodline that predated the Thorn line's ascension to Alpha sovereignty in the Northern Territories. She was still turning it over in her mind when the rogues hit the eastern meadow the following night. She had been there because she had ridden out at dusk to check on a report of disturbed fence lines near the Harker border, the kind of routine thing she handled personally because it kept her close to the actual conditions of the territory, because she believed that a Luna who only governed from inside stone walls eventually lost the ability to understand what she was governing. 3 of her personal guard were with her. The meadow was empty when they arrived, the fence line damaged, but the cause unclear. The rogues came out of the tree line on the eastern edge. What happened next was not the polished version she would have described in a council report. The polished version involved tactics and formation and controlled response. The actual version was brutal and fast and disorganized in the way that ambushes are always disorganized, where everything happens at once and your body responds before your mind catches up, and you don't know what's been done to you until you have a moment to check. She fought. She had always been able to fight. This was another thing the castle had mostly decided not to see, because it was more comfortable to have a Luna who was eloquent and politically sharp, rather than a Luna who had spent 3 years in her adolescence training with the border warriors of her mother's territory and had not wasted those years. She was not what Darius was. She would not pretend otherwise, but she was not helpless, and she was not soft, and when the first rogue came at her, she cracked her elbow into his jaw with enough force to drop him. The second one caught her from the left. Later, she would understand that the second rogue had been positioned specifically to get behind her. Later, she would understand that the entire attack had been a targeted operation, not opportunistic raiding. Later, she would understand a great many things. In the meadow, she understood only that something tore through her side and she went down on one knee, and the pain was so large and immediate that for a moment the world simply went white at the edges. She heard her guards fighting. She heard one of them scream. She got up. She kept moving. By the time the rogues pulled back, retreating with the abruptness of a planned withdrawal, not the chaos of defeat, two of her guards were injured and she was on her feet but barely, one hand pressed to her side, breathing in shallow increments because deep breathing made the pain spike in a way that took her vision. She knew before she checked. The knowledge arrived with the particular horror of things you already suspected but have been holding at a distance. She was 8 weeks along. She had not yet told Darius. She had been waiting for the right moment, she told herself. Though she recognized now in the meadow with blood on her hands, and her vision narrowing at the edges that the real reason she had been waiting was because something in her had already felt the wrongness of the last 2 months and understood, below the level of conscious thought, that the timing was not safe. She leaned against her horse and she breathed, and she did not let herself think about it. "We need to get back," she said. Her voice came out steady. This surprised her even now. "Kael, how bad is your arm?" "I'll manage," Kael said. He was young, 22, and trying not to look at her side. "Don't manage. Tell me the actual damage." "Deep cut above the elbow. I can ride." "Then ride. Mira, stay close. We're going straight to the healer's courtyard. We're not stopping." They rode back. The castle was lit up when they arrived. Not the torches at every window of an emergency alert, the lit up of a celebration. The banner hall over the great gate had been decorated. She could see figures moving on the upper balcony, the Alpha's private level, in silhouettes against firelight. Serena dismounted in the healer's courtyard and nearly went down. Kael caught her arm. She straightened. "Go inside," she told him. "Get treated." She walked toward the main entrance. She did not get far. The two guards at the eastern passage door stopped her. Not the usual pair, not the men she knew by name and had spoken with 100 times. These were castle soldiers she recognized but did not know personally, and there was something in the way they positioned themselves that told her the stoppage was not procedural. Luna, the taller one, did not quite meet her eyes. "You're required to come with us." Her mind was still working even through the pain, especially through the pain. Pain had a way of stripping everything down to what was actually present. "Required by whom?" she said. "Alpha's orders." She looked at them, both of them. The way they stood, not embarrassed, not reluctant, but sealed. Following instructions they had been given in advance, not responding to her in real time. "He knows I'm injured." Neither of them answered. "He knows," she said again, more quietly, working through it. "He knows I'm injured, and he has not sent the healer to the courtyard, and he has sent 2 soldiers I don't know to intercept me at this entrance." She breathed. "That is not a welfare check. Luna, please come with us." She could have fought. The thought crossed her mind with the clarity of a blade. She was bleeding, badly, and 2 uninjured soldiers would take her down in 30 seconds. But she could have made them do it. She could have forced the confrontation to be physical and loud and impossible to quietly contain. She considered it. She went with them. She went with them because she was still thinking, still calculating, still holding on to the belief that there had been some catastrophic miscommunication that she could address by remaining composed and presenting facts. She went with them because 7 years of steadiness had built in her a reflex toward de-escalation that she had not yet learned to override in high-stakes moments. She went with them, and that was the last voluntary choice she made for what would be a very long night. They took her down 2 levels below the main floor, past the storage rooms, past the lower archives, down a passage she had walked through once for an inspection 2 years ago and had not entered since. The smell changed as they descended. The air got heavier, colder, less ventilated. They opened a cell door. She stood in the corridor and looked at the cell, and something in her chest went very quiet and very cold. "This is a mistake," she said. "Luna." The taller soldier's voice had the texture of a man doing something he had decided not to think about too carefully. "Inside, please. I want to speak with Darius directly." "Those aren't our orders." I'm bleeding. I need medical attention. Denying a prisoner medical attention is a violation of pack charter, and the Alpha is aware of that. Those aren't our orders. She looked at him. He looked at the wall behind her left shoulder. She walked into the cell. They locked the door. The lock was a heavy bolt, the slide of it a sound with a specific and total quality. She stood in the middle of the cell and listened to their footsteps recede, and then there was silence, and the thin blade of torchlight under the door, and the distant percussion of the celebration upstairs that was now, she understood, happening while Darius Thorne knew his injured 8 weeks pregnant mate was locked in a cell beneath his feet. She did not scream. She sat down, very carefully, against the wall. She pressed her hand to her side. She breathed. Survival is not something that happens to you. It is something you do, in increments, in the dark, when every available piece of evidence is telling you that no one is coming and the situation is irreversible. The people who don't make it are not the ones who cry or break or go to pieces. That's not how it works. The people who don't make it are the ones who wait for external conditions to improve before they start managing their internal ones. They outsource their stability to circumstances that don't care whether they live. Serena pressed her hand to her wound and breathed and did not outsource. By the 3rd hour, she knew she had lost the pregnancy. The knowledge was not a single moment. It arrived the way certain devastating things arrive. In increments, she kept refusing until the body made the refusal impossible. She said nothing. She moved as little as possible. She kept the torn cloth pressed against her side, and she kept breathing. She thought about Orrin's archive room. She thought about the cross-reference notation she had found in the founding histories, the bloodline name that had appeared twice and then been carefully absent from every subsequent record. She thought about the pattern of Vanessa's movements over the past 8 months, the specific social geography of it, who she had cultivated, which council members she had charmed, which guards she had learned by name. She thought about the rogue attack, the positioning of the second attacker, the precision of the timing. Then she thought about what Vanessa would be doing right now, upstairs, in the golden light of the banquet hall, while Serena bled in the dark. She thought about Darius's face at the window. Things change. And here was the thing. Here was the thing she had not yet allowed herself to fully examine, because it had been easier to focus on Vanessa as the source of the problem. Vanessa as the active agent, Vanessa as the thing to be managed and countered. That framing let her keep something intact that she was not quite ready to put down. But there was no archive record in the world that could explain away what was happening right now. No manipulation sophisticated enough to move Darius Thorne to lock his mate in a cell without trial, without Darius Thorne deciding to do that. She had spent 7 years learning this man. She knew how his mind worked. She knew the specific shape of the moments when he overrode his better judgment because something had convinced him that the risk calculus demanded it. He had decided she was the risk. Somewhere between Vanessa's arrival and this moment, the alpha of the most feared pack in the Northern Territories had looked at the woman who had bled for him in a dozen different ways over 7 years, and had decided, on the word of someone who had known him for 8 months, that she was the threat. Serena sat with this truth for a long time. Then she set it down on one side and picked up the question that was more immediately urgent. She had been locked here without trial, without witness, without any formal council procedure. That was a violation. That was the kind of violation that created records, guards who had been given unusual orders, a healer who had not been called, soldiers reassigned specifically for an interception. That was the kind of violation that left tracks. The question was whether anyone in this castle was both willing and positioned to follow those tracks. She was still thinking when she heard the footsteps in the corridor, not guards. Guards moved with the even, flat rhythm of men executing routine. These footsteps were faster, intermittent, the sound of someone trying to be quiet, but pushed by urgency to move faster than quiet allowed. They stopped outside her door. A long pause. Then, just at the edge of audibility, the voice of an old man. "Luna." A breath. "Are you conscious?" "Orrin." Something cracked in her chest. She did not let it open all the way. She could not afford that. But she felt it. The specific shock of an ally appearing where you had fully accepted that no ally would. "I'm conscious," she said. Her voice was even. "I can't open the door. I don't have access. They've changed the guard rotation and the archive stairs are being watched. I had to come through the east drainage passage, and I won't be able to stay long. His voice was barely above a whisper, threaded with the specific agitation of an old man doing something reckless and aware of it. "Are you badly injured?" "I'll live." A pause that told her he understood exactly what that answer was covering. "I found the rest of it," he said. "What you were looking for in the records. There's more than a notation. There's a full lineage document in the lower archive, behind the pre-sovereignty histories. It was sealed and misfiled. Someone wanted it buried. Luna—" He stopped, started again. "The bloodline name in the founding records. It connects to your maternal line. Directly." She breathed through that. "The Moon Guardians," she said. The silence on the other side of the door had the quality of confirmation. "I need you to secure that document," she said. "Whatever you have to do to protect it. If they find out you've been researching this, they will come for it." "I know. I've already moved it." Another pause. "There are warriors who are asking questions." Aldrich, Kale spoke to Aldrich when he came in from the meadow. "Aldrich knows you were intercepted at the eastern door. He knows the healer was not called." A breath. "He is not sitting still." She thought about Aldrich. 35, senior patrol commander, Packborn, had served under Darius's father before serving under Darius. Not a man given to politics or interpretation. A man who understood, at a fundamental level, the difference between an order and a wrong. "Tell him to be patient," Serena said. "Tell him to gather information before he moves. If he acts now without evidence, Vanessa will use it to paint him as part of whatever I'm being accused of, and he'll end up down here with me, or worse." "And you?" She pressed her hand against the dried cloth on her side. She thought about the cold stone floor, and the bolt lock, and the sound of celebration upstairs. "I'll be all right." "Luna." "Oren." She kept her voice steady. "You've done something very brave coming here. Don't waste it by staying long enough to get caught. Go. Secure the document. Find Aldrich. Tell him what I told you." A long pause. "I'll be back," he said. "Don't risk it unless you have new information. I need you functional, not arrested." She listened to his footsteps recede. Slower now, more deliberate. An old man navigating by memory through a passage he had had to excavate from 50 years of accumulated recall. And then silence again, and the torchlight, and the distant sound from upstairs. The celebration was louder now. A peak, she thought. The part of a banquet where inhibitions had been sufficiently medicated and the noise became more genuine and less performed. She could hear the drums specifically, the deep ones used for alpha ceremonies, which meant they had moved into the formal part of the evening. She thought about what formal ceremony would look like tonight. Victory celebrations for the Eastern Border Offensive, speeches, the ranking of honors. She thought about a woman in a gold-trimmed dress standing where Serena was supposed to stand. The cold thing in her chest got colder. Not grief. Not yet. She wouldn't let it be grief yet because grief would mean accepting the full weight of everything she had lost in the last 12 hours. The pregnancy, the trust, the specific terrible intimacy of understanding that the man she had built a life beside had made her disposable. And she could not carry that and also think clearly. She needed to think clearly. Grief was for after. What she felt instead was something that didn't have a clean name. It lived in the bones of the hands. It had the quality of a decision becoming permanent. 7 years. She had spent 7 years making this pact strong. Not just in the abstract political sense. She meant physically, systemically, in the concrete, mundane, ongoing work of it. The grain distribution that had prevented 3 separate famine seasons. The alliance negotiation with the Harker settlements that had ended 6 years of border friction and open trade routes that now fed 40% of the pact's winter supply. The training protocols she had recommended to the patrol divisions that had reduced combat casualty rates by 20% in 4 years. The young wolves in the outer territories who had grown up with the Luna visiting their settlements personally, learning their names, bringing medicine and teachers, and occasionally just the specific and valuable knowledge that the leadership of their pack knew they existed. That was her work. 7 years of it. And Darius Thorne had locked her in a cell on a dead woman's word without asking her a single question. The drums kept going upstairs. Serena sat in the dark with her back straight and her chained hands in her lap, and let the cold thing in her chest settle into the shape it was going to keep. She was not going to forgive this. That was the thought. Not rage, not plotting, just a clean, final understanding. She was not going to forgive this, and she was not going to manage her way around it. and she was not going to produce the graceful narrative of the wronged woman who returns to rebuild the love that betrayal interrupted. She had spent 7 years being the steadying force, the measured voice, the Luna who knew which confrontations to avoid because the pack needed stability more than she needed to be right. She was done with that math. She was going to get out of this cell. She was going to find out every specific thing that Vanessa had done and documented and paid for. She was going to put it in front of the people it needed to be in front of. And she was going to let this kingdom see exactly what had happened in the 12 hours that everyone upstairs had been drinking and drumming and pretending did not exist. The bolt on her door moved. Not Oren. The sound was different. The practiced, authorized sound of a guard shift change. The slot at the bottom opened and a hand pushed bread through and then retracted. She looked at the bread on the floor. She picked it up. She ate it. Upstairs, the drums reached a fever pitch and then stopped. And in the ringing silence that followed, she heard the crowd roar. The specific roar of a crowd watching something be placed on someone's head. The Luna crown. Serena closed her eyes. She pressed her back against the wall, and she breathed, and she let the cold thing in her chest finish taking its shape. And somewhere in the lower archive tower, behind 50 years of misfiled pre-sovereignty histories, a sealed document waited with her name written into the oldest lines of the Northern Territories. Not as a Luna by marriage, not as a woman who had been given a title, but as the last living carrier of a bloodline that predated every wall of this castle. She did not know that yet, but by morning she would. Ursemtu. 3 levels above her, as the crown settled on Vanessa Draven's head, and Darius Thorne raised his cup to the gathered alphas of the Northern Territories, a young warrior named Kyle slipped out of the medic room with his arm freshly wrapped and his jaw set hard, walking fast toward the senior quarters where Aldrich was waiting. And in Aldrich's hand was a letter with Vanessa's seal that had been found in the saddlebag of one of the retreating rogues. A letter with names and a date and a location written in ink that had not yet fully dried when the attack began. The letter had Vanessa's seal on it. Aldrich held it flat on the table with 2 fingers, like a thing that might still be warm, and looked at Kyle across the low flame of the oil lamp. "Where exactly?" Aldrich said. "Inner left saddlebag. The rogue we took down near the east fence line, he wasn't dead when we brought him in. He bled out in the outer courtyard, but before that, Mira checked him for weapons and found the bag still buckled." Cale kept his wrapped arm close to his body. The cut had been deep and the healer had sewn it tight, and every time he moved wrong, it pulled. "She didn't know what it was. She gave it to me because she didn't know who else." Aldrich looked at the seal, the Draven crest, pressed in dark wax, slightly imperfect on the left edge, the way it goes when the stamp is applied in haste. "Has anyone else seen this?" "No. Mira. She knows I have it. She doesn't know what's in it. I didn't open it in front of her." Kyle paused. "I didn't open it at all. I brought it straight here." Aldrich picked it up. He broke the seal carefully, working the wax rather than tearing it, because he was a man who understood that the condition of evidence mattered. He unfolded the paper and read it, and his face did not change while he read it, which was the thing about Aldrich that newer soldiers always misread as coldness. It wasn't coldness. It was the specific stillness of a man with a long memory processing information against a very large context. He set the letter back on the table. "How is the Luna?" he said. Kael's jaw tightened. She was bleeding when they took her, her side. She needed the healer, and they didn't call one. He stopped. Then, with the flatness of someone reporting something that required flatness to survive the saying of it, she lost the pregnancy. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "She was pregnant," he said. 8 weeks. She hadn't told anyone yet." Kyle's voice dropped. "Mira figured it out. She was with the Luna when they dismounted. She could tell." The oil lamp threw long shadows up the wall. Outside the window, the drums from the banquet hall had finally stopped, replaced by the looser, less organized noise of a celebration winding down into drinking. Aldrich listened to it for a moment with the expression of a man adding one more item to a very specific mental ledger. "The Alpha doesn't know," Aldrich said. It wasn't a question. "If he knew," Kyle said carefully, "would he have locked her in that cell?" The silence that followed that question had weight to it. Aldrich folded the letter with the same care he'd used to open it and tucked it inside his vest. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to your quarters, and you're going to sleep, and tomorrow morning you're going to do exactly what you would do on any other morning. You speak to no one about this tonight." "And you?" "I'm going to find out who else was in that eastern corridor when she was brought in. I need witnesses, and I need them solid before I do anything with this." He met Kael's eyes directly. "If we move wrong on this, Vanessa buries us next to the Luna, and the Alpha never knows the difference. You understand that?" Kael understood it. He understood it the way young soldiers understand things when they realize for the first time that the structure they've been loyal to has a seam running through it. He left. Aldrich sat alone with the lamp for a long time. Morning came to the underground cell as a slight adjustment in temperature, nothing more. No window, no light. Serena knew it was morning because her body knew it, the animal clock that functions below consciousness and keeps time regardless of conditions. She had not slept. She had not tried to. She had spent the night doing what she could do, which was think, organize, and manage the wound. The bleeding had slowed significantly by the 4th hour. She had kept pressure on it, kept her movement minimal, kept her breathing steady. She had cataloged everything she knew about Vanessa's operational pattern over the past 8 months, who she'd spoken to, who she'd given gifts to, what she'd asked about in casual conversation that was not actually casual. She had constructed, in the dark and in silence, the architecture of what had been done to her. It held together. The more she examined it, the more solidly it held. The door opened without warning. Not the food slot, the full door, bolt sliding back with the same authorized sound as before, and Serena was on her feet before she consciously decided to stand. The chains allowed it. She stood. It was not a guard. It was Darius. He filled the door frame the way he always filled door frames, the specific physical fact of him that she had once, a long time ago, found something other than what she found it now. He was still dressed from the night before. Not the formal ceremonial clothes, but his later clothes, the ones he changed into after official events, darker and less decorated. His face was the face of a man who had not slept either, but for different reasons. He looked at her. She looked back. The space between them was 8 feet of stone floor and 7 years of everything that had been real and everything that had turned out not to be, and Serena stood in the middle of her own wreckage and did not move toward him and did not look away. "You should have called the healer," she said. His jaw moved. "Serena, that's not an accusation. That's a fact. Whatever I'm accused of, PAC charter requires medical attention for any detained person. You know the charter. You wrote 3 of the amendments." He stepped inside the cell. He didn't close the door. The corridor behind him was empty. "I need you to tell me it isn't true," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Which part?" Vanessa said, "I know what Vanessa said." Her voice was even. "She said I betrayed the PAC, gave information to outside parties, undermined the Eastern Offensive." She kept her eyes on his face. "She's specific about it, isn't she? The accusations. Specific enough that they sound like they have a source." Something moved in his expression. "She has letters," he said. "She has forgeries. She has letters with your seal, Darius." She said his name the way she'd said it in 7 years of council rooms and border disputes and private arguments, the tone that meant stop performing and actually look at what's in front of you. "I was in the Eastern Meadow because I rode out to check a disturbed fence line. That report came through standard channels. If someone wanted me out of the castle at a specific time and at a specific location, all they needed was access to the patrol dispatch system." She watched him. "Who filed that report?" she said. The silence. "You didn't check," she said. His jaw was tight. "The dispatch system. Who filed the original report that sent me to the Eastern Meadow yesterday evening? That is a specific, verifiable fact. You can answer it in 20 minutes. She held his eyes. "But you locked me in this cell and went upstairs and you haven't asked that question yet, which means either you don't want the answer or someone has convinced you the question isn't necessary." "That's not Darius." The evenness cracked, just slightly, just enough for the thing underneath to show through like bone through skin. "I lost the pregnancy last night." The breath went out of him. She watched it happen, watched the information hit him, The way catastrophic information hits even people who have done catastrophic things. Not with guilt first, but with a kind of physical shock, the body registering the magnitude before the mind has organized its defenses. His face changed, cracked open somewhere behind the eyes. And for a moment she saw the man she had built a life beside. She didn't move toward him. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't know. I hadn't told you yet." She breathed. "I was 8 weeks along. I was attacked by rogues who were positioned to take me down specifically, who withdrew in a pattern that looked planned rather than defensive, and I came back bleeding, and I lost the pregnancy in this cell without a healer, while you were upstairs putting a crown on someone else's head." She kept her voice factual, not cold, factual, which was different, which required more precision. "That is what happened. I need you to understand exactly what happened before you say another word about Vanessa's letters." Darius stood very still. "Tell me how to fix this," he said. Something in her chest pulled tight. That was the thing. That was the exact shape of the thing that had kept her here 7 years. The specific way this man, when confronted with damage he had done, turned immediately to the question of repair. As though the damage were a tactical problem. As though she were a wall with a breach in it. "I don't know yet," she said. "Serena, I don't know yet," she said again, more quietly. "Because I don't know the full scope of what's been done. And I don't know who in this castle is compromised. And I don't know whether the answer to those questions is going to leave anything fixable when it's done." She looked at him directly. "What I know is that I need to be out of this cell. I need medical attention. And I need access to the dispatch records and the archive on the lower level. Those are the 3 things I need. Whether anything else is possible after that depends on what we find." Darius looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the door and said something to someone in the corridor she hadn't seen. Footsteps. A key in the chain lock on the wall. The chains came off. She kept her face still as the blood rushed back into full pressure in her wrists. She picked up the cloth from the floor, looked at it, set it down. Her side ached with the low, persistent throb of a wound that had clotted but not healed. "The healer is waiting above," Darius said. She walked to the door. She stopped in the frame without looking back at him. "The letter Vanessa used," she said. "The one with my seal. Bring it to me when I'm done with the healer. I want to look at the ink." The healer's name was Petra, and she was 60, and she did her work with the specific silent efficiency of a woman who had learned to ask nothing in situations where asking would cost time that patients didn't have. She examined Serena in a side room off the main healing hall, a room with a door that closed, and she did not comment on the circumstances, and she did not ask how Serena had come to spend a night unchained in a prison cell with an untreated wound. She cleaned it, stitched what needed stitching, and pressed a folded cloth over the whole of it. "You need rest," Petra said. "I know. Actual rest, not the kind where you solve problems horizontally." "Understood." Petra looked at her with the eyes of a woman who had been healing wolves for 40 years and did not believe her. "There's something else," she said. Not a question. "I know." "You should say it out loud." Serena was quiet for a moment. "Not yet." Petra held her gaze for 2 long seconds. Then she nodded, once the way someone nods when they are accepting a decision they disagree with because they respect the person making it. "I'll check on you this evening," Petra said. Serena was already standing. But, Aldrich found her in the corridor outside the healing room, which told her he'd been watching for her, which told her the night had produced something. He said nothing until they were in a stairwell away from the hall traffic, and then he said, "How bad is the wound?" "Manageable." "What do you have?" He told her about the letter. He kept it brief, the rogue, the saddlebag, the seal, the content. He told her what was in it, the way soldiers tell commanding officers things, in order, without embellishment, watching for which details registered. She held out her hand. He gave her the letter. She read it once. Then she folded it and held it. "Kael and Mira," she said. "Solid, both of them. Anyone else in the eastern corridor who saw them bring me in. 3 additional guards. 2 of them were reassigned to the outer perimeter rotation this morning, which is an irregular change and fast." He paused. "Someone moved them before I could get to them." Serena thought about that. Someone monitoring the situation and responding fast enough to reassign witnesses before an inquiry got to them. That was not improvisation. That was a contingency plan. She expected me to survive the meadow, Serena said. Yes. She needed me alive and accused. A dead Luna is a different kind of problem than a traitorous one. Yes. Serena looked down the stairwell. The castle had its normal morning sounds now. The kitchen, the early patrol changeover, the administrative movement of a large structure coming into its daily operation. The same sounds as every morning. She had stood in these corridors for 7 years listening to them, and never noticed the specific quality of hearing them from this side of a situation. The document Oren found, she said. I need it secured with someone outside the castle structure, not hidden inside it. Aldrich looked at her. You think the castle is compromised? I think Vanessa moved 2 witnesses in the time it took you to walk from the medic room to senior quarters. I think she's been working this operation for 8 months with enough patience and enough resource to forge my seal convincingly. And I think she's been doing all of it inside these walls, which means she has access I haven't fully mapped yet. Serena met his eyes. Yes, I think the castle is partially compromised. And I think when Darius asks me to tell him what we need to do, what I don't tell him is that I am no longer certain every person in his inner structure is actually his. Aldrich was quiet. That includes not telling him about this letter, she said, until I know whether whoever Vanessa has in this building is positioned close enough to him to know what he knows. She held out the letter. He took it back. What do you want me to do? He said. Find out who filed the Eastern Fence Line report that sent me to the meadow. Find out where the 2 reassigned guards are, and whether they can be approached. And find out whether Vanessa was inside the castle at the time of the rogue attack, and who can verify her location, and whether any of those people have received unusual payment or assignment in the last 8 months. Aldrich listened to the list with the focused attention of a man who had been given targeting coordinates. And you, he said. I'm going to go look at the letter with my seal on it. She started up the stairs. Luna. His voice stopped her. Low, almost private, the voice of a man setting aside the operational register for one sentence. I should have come sooner. She looked down at him from 3 steps up. You're here now, she said. She kept climbing. Shimon. Darius was waiting in his study with the letter on the table between them, like something neither of them wanted to touch first. He watched her cross the room and pick it up and hold it to the light from the east window. And he said nothing, because he had enough experience with Serena to recognize when she was working and needed silence to work in. She looked at the ink. She looked at the seal. She set it down and pressed 2 fingers to the edge of the paper and felt the weight. This paper is not from the castle stock, she said. Darius frowned. What? The castle uses Harker Mill parchment for all formal correspondence. It has a specific weight and a specific tooth. This is lighter. You can feel it if you know what you're feeling for. She held the edge of the letter toward him. The seal impression is correct. She had access to my stamp or had one made, but the paper is wrong. Whoever forged this didn't have access to the Luna's correspondence supply. Darius looked at the paper. That's verifiable. Call the head of correspondence stores and have him compare. That takes 30 minutes. She set the letter down. But you already believe me. I can see that you believe me, and that means we have a different problem. He looked at her. You believed her first, Serena said. You had me put in a cell without asking me a single question. That is the thing that cannot be explained by forged letters or manipulated reports, Darius. That is you. She held his eyes. I need to know exactly what she said to you, and exactly when she said it, and who was present, because whatever she told you was designed to produce that specific response. And if I'm going to understand the full architecture of what she built here, I need to understand what she knew about you well enough to predict it. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the pack was moving through its mourning. Serena could hear the training ground, the distant sound of the smithy, the normal percussion of a working stronghold that had no idea its foundation had a crack running through it. Darius sat down. He looked older than he had yesterday, she thought, the specific aging that comes not from time, but from events. She came to me 3 nights ago, he said. Serena went still. 3 nights ago, she repeated. 3 nights ago. The night after Serena had gone to Oren's archive room. She said she had information about a security breach. She said she'd been watching it develop for weeks and had been afraid to come to me because... He stopped. His jaw worked. Because she said you had influence over who I believed. Serena absorbed this without expression. 3 nights ago. The same night she had found the reference to the Moon Guardian bloodline in the founding histories. The same night she had left Oren's archive and gone directly to Darius's study, and he had told her things change and sent her away. Vanessa had been watching the archive visits. She had known what Serena was looking for, and she had moved the moment Serena got close to finding it. The cold thing in Serena's chest sharpened into something with a precise edge. This had never been about the Eastern Offensive. This had never been about Darius or jealousy or even power in the conventional sense. The rogue attack, the forged letters, the arrest. All of it had been designed with one specific purpose: to remove Serena from the castle before she finished reading those records. Because Vanessa knew what was in them, and she knew what it meant if Serena found it. Serena looked at Darius across the table with the cold, precise thing settled into the center of her chest, and she understood that the conversation she was about to have with him was no longer about their marriage, or the cell, or the child they had lost. It was about what was buried in the lower archive, and why someone had spent 8 months engineering an entire conspiracy to keep Serena Vale from reading it. "I need to get to the archive," she said. "Serena, we're not finished." "Darius," her voice was flat and final and entirely without concession. "I need to get to the lower archive right now, because whatever Vanessa was willing to do to stop me from reading those records is going to tell us more about what we're actually dealing with than anything in this room. And if I'm right about what's in them..." She stopped. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Fast, the wrong kind of fast. Not urgency, but the specifically controlled speed of someone delivering news they needed to control the delivery of. The door opened, one of the inner staff, pale, keeping his face arranged. "My lord, the outer territories are reporting." He paused. "The northern crop fields, something has happened to the fields." Darius stood. "What kind of something?" he said. "The grain. The man's composure slipped slightly. 3 separate fields, dead. The harvests from last season's planting, the reports say it's like something pulled the life out of them overnight. And the scouts on the ridge..." He stopped again. "The alpha wolf markers on the northern boundary stones. They're dark, my lord. All of them." The room was very quiet. Serena looked at the window. Outside, the morning sky was exactly what it had been. The training ground sounds continued. The smithy. But somewhere in her bones, something that had never made itself known before shifted and steadied, like a compass finding north for the first time. She thought about the founding histories. The bloodline that had been buried in the records. The specific language Oren had used through the cell door, his voice barely above a whisper. The true source of the pack's power and prosperity. She thought about Vanessa's face at the ceremony last night, in the firelight, with the Luna crown on her head. She thought about what happens when a bloodline is put in the wrong place. "I need to get to the archive," Serena said again. "Now, today, before anything else." And this time, Darius did not argue. The lower archive smelled like cold stone and decades of undisturbed air. Serena moved through it with a torch in one hand and Oren 3 steps behind her, and Darius behind him. And she was aware of all of them, but not looking at them because she was looking at the shelves. The archive occupied 2 connected rooms beneath the tower, accessed by a passage that required a specific key from the head of records, a key that Darius had retrieved personally from the records office without explaining why he needed it, which was the right call, because the fewer people who knew they were down here, the better. The main room held the current administrative histories, bound volumes organized by year, going back 4 decades. The second room was older. The shelves there were rougher timber, some of the volumes wrapped in treated leather rather than bound, and the organization was the older system, thematic rather than chronological, which required knowing what you were looking for before you started. Oren knew. He moved past her to the far left wall and crouched with the specific, careful articulation of a man managing old joints on a cold floor, and his hands went directly to a section of the lowest shelf without hesitation. "I moved it twice," he said. "Didn't trust the first location after the Eastern Guards were reassigned this morning." He pulled out a volume that looked identical to the others. Same leather wrapping, same age-darkened edges, and from inside the back cover he extracted a folded document that was older than the volume itself by at least a generation. The paper had the color of old cream, and the particular stiffness of vellum that had been kept dry and still for a very long time. He held it out to Serena. She took it. She unfolded it carefully, holding the torch close but not too close, and read. The document was a lineage certification. The form was archaic. The language predated current pack charter by at least 60 years. But the structure was clear. A bloodline registry, the kind produced by the original territorial councils when the northern packs were first being organized under centralized authority. Names, descent lines, territorial claims. The kind of document that established who owned what and why, in the era before ownership was settled by force alone. The name at the top was Vale, not Serena's family in the contemporary sense, not the Vale household she had grown up in, the mid-tier landholding family with a good reputation and a clean history. Something older. The original Vale line, the founding branch, going back to the pre-sovereignty era before the Thorne family consolidated the northern territories under Alpha rule. And running down the right margin of the document, in the precise notational script of whoever had compiled it, was a designation she had seen referenced in the founding histories upstairs, the designation that had been cross-referenced and then carefully excised from every subsequent record. Moon Guardian Bloodline. Last verified carrier, listed by generation, by generation, by generation, and then, in ink slightly newer than the rest, added by a different hand at a later date, a final entry, a woman's name, and below it, a single word in the same newer ink, daughter. Serena looked at the word for a long time. Then she looked at the top of the document again, where the territorial claims section described what the Moon Guardian bloodline carried. Not land, not political title, something older and more specific. The original covenant between the founding packs and the wolf spirits of the northern territories. The bloodline was not symbolic. According to the document, it was functional. The ancient compact that kept the pack's moonlight blessing active and its territory protected required a living carrier of the original line to hold the Luna position. Without it, the compact deteriorated. With someone else in the Luna seat, it broke. She thought about the dead grain fields this morning, the darkened boundary markers, the wolf spirits refusing to answer. She thought about the crown on Vanessa's head last night. She knew, Serena said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She said it again, not louder but more deliberate, making sure the full shape of the realization was present in her own mouth before she said it to anyone else. She knew exactly what this document contained, and she knew exactly what would happen when she took that crown. She didn't just want the Alpha's favor, she wanted the compact to break. Behind her, Darius was very still. Why? He said. Because a pack whose ancient protection has collapsed is a pack that can be taken. She turned and looked at him. The Draven estate, mid-tier landholdings and beautiful women who understand political utility. That was what we thought. But if the Draven family knew about this bloodline, if they knew the covenant existed and understood what breaking it would do to the northern territories, this was never about you, Darius. You were the mechanism. Getting Vanessa close enough to take the Luna seat was the actual operation. Darius looked like a man standing on ground that was still moving after the earthquake had stopped. She had seen this look on him before, in the early years, during a council betrayal that had cost them a critical border alliance. The specific shock of someone who understands tactics and strategy, discovering they have been outmaneuvered, not on the tactical level, but on an entirely different plane of reasoning, one they had not known existed. He had built his strength on being the most dangerous thing in the room. He had not accounted for a threat that was never in the room. Serena folded the document and held it against her side. I need to know who she's working with in the castle, she said, not who she charmed or who she paid for small favors. Who she has in a position that matters, council level, someone who could move those guards this morning and have it look like a routine reassignment. Darius said, Harwick. The name landed in the cold archive air like something dropped. Serena looked at him. Lord Harwick was the senior council chair. He had held the position for 11 years. He had been instrumental in 3 major territorial negotiations and had Darius's complete institutional trust in all matters of internal administration. He was 62 and methodical, and Serena had worked alongside him for 7 years, and had always found him careful, not warm, but careful and competent in the specific way that bureaucratic power requires. "You know," she said, "I didn't know. I'm working it out right now, the same as you." Darius's jaw was set hard. "The guard reassignment this morning. I asked about it as a routine question because you told me to look. The authorization came through Harwick's office." He paused. "The Eastern Fence Line report. I had someone check while you were with the healer. It was filed through the Outer Patrol system, but the originating authorization, the person who flagged the fence line as requiring Luna inspection specifically, ran through Harwick's deputy." Oren, still crouched by the shelf, let out a slow breath. Serena stood very still. Harwick. 11 years of institutional trust. 11 years of sitting in council sessions 3 feet from Darius, knowing everything the pack knew about itself. Every defensive weakness, every alliance dependency, every resource vulnerability, every piece of information a competing territorial power would need to dismantle the Northern Pack from the inside out. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." "You need to know before you move on him. If he's been feeding information to the Draven network for more than a year, we have to assume the Draven estate has operational knowledge of this pack that we can't fully catalog." She was thinking fast, the kind of thinking that happens when the problem expands mid-calculation and you have to keep running the new numbers without stopping. And if they have that knowledge, they already know we found the document, because Harwick would have had a watch on Oren's archive access the moment I started coming here. The silence in the archive had a different quality now. Oren stood up slowly. His face was the specific white of a man who has understood the scope of his own exposure. "The archive visits," he said. "Yes." "They would have known from the first time you came to me." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Then they've been watching everything since." Serena looked at the document in her hand. She looked at the archive around her. The shelves, the volumes, the decades of records. She thought about the past 3 days as a sequence seen from Harwick's perspective. Serena visiting the archive. Serena going to Darius's study. Vanessa moving to Darius before Serena could finish her research. The rogue attack timed to intercept Serena in the eastern meadow. The forged letters. The arrest. Every step had been responsive. Vanessa and Harwick had not been following a fixed plan. They had been running an adaptive operation, adjusting to Serena's movements in real time, which meant they had had real-time information about those movements, which meant the watch on Oren's archive had not been the only watch. She thought about who had access to her personal schedule, who routed her correspondence. Who would know when she rode out for border inspections versus when she stayed in the castle? Her personal secretary was a young woman named Della who had been in the position for 2 years. Serena had selected her herself, trained her herself. She had always found Della conscientious and unobtrusive. She thought about the 2 months where everything had started to go wrong. The slight delays in correspondence, the border report that had reached Darius before she'd seen it, the council session she had missed because she'd been given the wrong time. Small things. The kind of small things you explained away as administrative error because the alternative was too exhausting to investigate while you were simultaneously managing a pack. "Darius," she said. "Who hired Della?" She watched his face run through the same sequence she had just run. It took him about 4 seconds. "Harwick recommended her," he said. "Standard placement. She came with good references from the Draven." He stopped. The words sat in the air between them. "Yes," Serena said. She turned and walked toward the archive door. "Where are you going?" Darius said. "To find Aldrich. Serena, we need to move before Harwick knows we found the document and realizes we've connected him." She stopped in the doorway without turning. "You need to call a council session for this afternoon. Routine administrative review. Give no specific reason. If you cancel or alter Harwick's access before we're positioned, he'll run or he'll burn what we need." She turned her head slightly. "And you need to get Vanessa out of the Luna quarters. Put her somewhere you can watch her without her knowing she's being watched. Tell her it's for her safety because of the pack disruption this morning. She'll believe that because she thinks you still trust the situation." "And the crown," Darius said. She looked at him directly now. His face was controlled, but underneath the control was something raw and unresolved, the specific expression of a man who has made a catastrophic mistake and is now holding the weight of it in full. "The crown is a piece of metal," she said. "The The compact is already broken. Getting it off her head doesn't fix anything until we address the actual damage. She left him in the archive. Aldrich was waiting in the outer passage. He had positioned himself with the particular intentionality of someone who knew which routes were being used and had arranged to intersect this one without appearing to be waiting, which was a skill she had always appreciated in him. She told him about Harwick in 30 seconds of flat operational language. He took it the same way he had taken everything else, without flinching, running the implications in real time. Della, he said, pull her access this morning, but do not detain her. If you detain her, Harwick sees a flag. I want her isolated from communications without knowing she's isolated. Can you do that? Reassign her to an administrative task that requires her to be in the South Wing without access to the message system. There's a records audit due. I can route it through her as an urgent priority. She won't question it. Do it in the next hour. He nodded. Then he held out the folded letter, Vanessa's letter, the one from the rogue saddlebag. There's something else, he said. I had Kael go back to the outer courtyard where the rogue's body was taken. The body has been moved. Standard practice would have it in the outer cold storage for 3 days pending territorial protocol. It was removed this morning and reportedly burned under sanitation orders. Serena looked at him. Harwick's office, she said. Harwick's office. She thought about the letter in her hand and the body that was now ash, and the 2 witnesses who had been reassigned before dawn. She thought about how cleanly and quickly all of it was being handled, the specific efficiency of it, the speed. Harwick had been doing this for a long time. The letter is still enough, she said. Combined with the archive document and your testimony on the guard reassignments. We don't need the body if we have those. She paused. But I want the 2 reassigned guards found before the council session. I want to know whether they can be brought back in or whether they've been fully turned. Understood. She started moving. The castle around her looked exactly as it always had. The same corridors, the same morning light through the same windows, the same staff crossing the same floors on the same daily patterns. She had walked through this building for 7 years and known it the way you know a place you've made your own. The details that only show up after months. The particular way the third stair on the east wing creaks, the draft in the north passage that never entirely went away. She looked at it now and felt the knowledge settle into her bones that it had never been entirely hers. That the access, the influence, the position, all of it had rested on something more fragile than she had understood. Not love, not even loyalty, but the specific willingness of a powerful man to allow her to occupy the space she occupied. The moment that willingness shifted, she had lost everything. Cell, chains, a child she would never hold. She kept walking. There was a version of this moment where she let the grief open and flood the available space. She could feel the edge of it, present the way an unlanced wound is present. A pressure, a heat, the constant awareness of a thing that needed to be dealt with eventually. The pregnancy. The specific knowledge of what had been taken from her in that cell, not abstractly but physically, irrevocably, while drums played 3 floors above. Not yet. The grief would be there when she needed it. Right now, she needed the cold thing that had settled into her chest 2 nights ago and hadn't moved since. That thing was serving a function. She was not going to put it down until the function was complete. She found the East Wing corridor and moved toward the Luna quarters. Vanessa was there. She was standing at the window when Serena opened the door, and she turned with the composed readiness of a woman who had been expecting a confrontation and had prepared her face for it. The crown was on the dressing table. The room was arranged with the specific territorial confidence of someone who had been here long enough to rearrange it. Serena stood in the doorway. The 2 women looked at each other across the length of the room. Vanessa was beautiful in the way of a weapon that had been designed and finished carefully. Not incidentally beautiful, but purposefully so, every element calibrated for maximum operational utility. Serena had always known this. She had spent 8 months watching it and filing it away and not naming it correctly. She named it now. I know about Harwick, Serena said. Something moved in Vanessa's eyes. Just a flicker, fast and controlled, but present. I don't know what you... Don't. Serena kept her voice level. Not because I can't absorb the performance, but because it wastes time we both know I'm not going to let you have. She stepped into the room. I know about the rogue payment. I know about the fence line report, I know about the archive watch, and I know about Della, And I know why you needed the compact broken, and I know whose resources funded this operation. She stopped 6 feet away. What I don't know yet is the full scope of the Draven Network's territorial ambitions and how many other packs in the northern system have been compromised by the same approach. Vanessa's face had gone very still. That's what I'm going to find out, Serena said. With or without your cooperation. The only variable you control right now is which version of the next several months you prefer to experience. Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened in her expression. Not defeat exactly, but a recalibration, the specific shift of someone setting down one strategy and picking up a different one. You think you've won something, Vanessa said. I think I've got enough to take you apart in front of every alpha in the Northern Territories. You think Darius will let you? Serena looked at her. I'm not asking his permission, she said. The silence was very complete. Then Vanessa's hand moved. Serena saw it a half second before it happened. The hand going not toward a weapon, but toward the small clay vessel on the table beside her. The vessel that looked like a decorative piece and had been sitting there unremarked. And the motion was fast and specific. The motion of someone reaching for something they had positioned in advance. Serena moved. She crossed the 6 feet and got her hand on Vanessa's wrist before the vessel was fully in her grip, and the struggle was brief and brutal. Not a fight, but a contest of leverage. Serena driving Vanessa's arm back against the table edge, with enough force to make the vessel tip and fall and shatter on the floor between them. The smell that came off the broken shards was wrong. Not perfume, not oil. Something with a chemical sharpness under it. They both froze. Serena looked down at the spreading liquid on the stone floor. She looked at her hand, where a thin line of it had run across 2 fingers in the moment of impact. She looked up at Vanessa. Vanessa's expression had changed entirely. Gone was the composed readiness. Gone was the recalibrating intelligence. What was left was something older and less managed. The raw face of someone who has just watched their last contingency fail. What is that? Serena said. Vanessa said nothing. What is in that vessel? Still nothing, but Vanessa's eyes had gone to Serena's hand where the liquid sat across 2 fingers, and the look in them was not triumphant and not afraid. It was waiting. Serena looked at her own hand. The 2 fingers where the liquid had touched were already numb. The numbness was spreading. She looked up at Vanessa and understood, with the total clarity of a person in the first 30 seconds of a catastrophic situation, that the operation was not over. That Vanessa had never intended to be taken alive to a council session. That the clay vessel had been a final option, positioned in advance, for the moment when every other option was gone, and that the question of what exactly was in it, how far the numbness would spread, how fast, what it would do, was a question she needed an answer to in the next few minutes, not the next few hours. She grabbed Vanessa by the front of her dress with her unaffected hand. Tell me what it is, she said. Tell me right now. And Vanessa, for the first time since Serena had walked into this room, smiled. The numbness reached her wrist in under a minute. Serena felt it climbing with the specific, unhurried progression of something that did not need to rush because it had already won the timeline. Not pain. That was the thing that made it worse. Pain she could work with. Pain gave you data, gave you a location, gave you something to push against. This was the absence of sensation moving up her arm like a tide coming in, and she stood in the Luna quarters with her hand locked in Vanessa's dress and watched her own fingers stop being fingers she could feel. She let go of Vanessa, not because she wanted to, because the hand had stopped responding to what she wanted. Vanessa stepped back and smoothed the front of her dress with a composure that was almost impressive in its completeness. Cold root extract, Vanessa said. Concentrated. It won't kill you. I want to be precise about that. It will paralyze the affected limb for approximately 6 hours and cause significant cardiovascular stress for the first 2. She looked at Serena's hand with the detached assessment of a woman describing a mechanism she had designed. The real problem isn't the paralysis, it's the heart irregularity. If you exert yourself in the next hour, you'll drop. Serena looked at her. You had that position before I came in, she said. I had it positioned when Darius sent word that you were out of the cell. Vanessa's voice was even. I'm not careless. No, Serena said. You're not. She turned and walked to the door. You're going to call for the healer, Vanessa said behind her. And while you're doing that, Harwick will have already moved. Serena stopped. He has a contingency, Vanessa said. He's had it for 6 months. If I'm compromised, he burns the archive and takes what he needs and walks out of this castle with enough information to sell the Northern Territories to every competing power on the continent. A pause. You have maybe 40 minutes before he realizes this conversation didn't go the way it was supposed to and triggers it. Serena stood in the doorway. Her arm was numb to the elbow. She could feel her heart doing something uneven, not painful yet, but present, a new arrhythmia she had not had 20 minutes ago. She breathed through it and made herself think past it, because thinking past physical limitation was something she had been doing since she was 18 years old, and it did not stop being possible just because the limitation was more serious now. 40 minutes. She had to choose. Healer or Harwick? She turned back into the room. Where is his contingency positioned? She said. Vanessa smiled again. Why would I tell you that? Because if Harwick burns the archive, that document goes with it. The bloodline record, the covenant evidence, everything that tells this kingdom what you actually are. She kept her eyes on Vanessa's face. And without that document, I can't prove what you did, which means the best case for you is that you walk out of this with a treason charge instead of a conspiracy charge. The worst case is that Darius buries you quietly, and the Draven network loses its operative and never sends reinforcements. She paused. With the document, what you're part of is large enough to require a formal territorial response. Large enough that the Draven estate gets exposed at the council level. Large enough that your people know what happened to you and why. And I think you care about that. I think you care about it more than you're letting show right now. The silence stretched. Vanessa's face moved through several things in quick succession. Calculation, resistance, something older and harder underneath both. South Tower, she said. The room behind the weapons storage on the second level. There's a locked chest under the floorboards. He's had it there since winter. Serena left. She ran. Her left arm was dead weight from the elbow down, and her side screamed where Petra's stitches pulled with every stride, and her heart was doing the irregular thing in a way that had gone from noticeable to alarming, a stuttering quality to it that she felt in her throat. She ran anyway. The South Tower was 4 minutes at a hard pace, and she had 38 minutes, and she was not going to spend them being careful. She hit the main corridor and collided with Aldrich. He caught her by the shoulder, the right one, the functional one, and took in her face and her arm in a single second. What happened? Coldroot. I'm mobile for now. South Tower, second level, weapons storage room. There's a hidden chest under the floor, Harwick's contingency. I need you there before he triggers it. She was already moving. And I need Kyle and whoever else is yours to get to the archive now and physically stay on it. Harwick cannot get into that room. Aldrich released her and turned without a word. She heard him barking names as he moved. She kept running. The South Tower secondary level was used for overflow weapons storage, training equipment, older armaments that weren't in regular rotation, the general accumulation of a working military structure. The room behind the main storage was a maintenance space, lower ceiling, shelving along 3 walls, a stone floor that had been laid over bare earth sometime in the castle's older construction phase. She found the loose board by feel, her one functional hand testing the floor in a fast grid pattern, and pulled it up to find a locked iron chest roughly the size of a traveling case. She looked at the lock. She looked at her one functional hand. She stood up and looked for something with weight. The training equipment included wooden practice weapons, a rack of older iron-capped training staves, and 2 heavy counterweights from a dismantled suspension training rig. She grabbed a counterweight, which was awkward with one hand, and brought it down on the lock twice. The second impact sheared the hasp enough that she could work the broken edge free with her fingers. The chest opened. Inside, correspondence. Dozens of letters, organized by pack seal. 3 territorial maps with markings in a cipher she didn't know but could recognize as systematic. A record book. The same narrow-bound format as administrative records, but the entries inside were written in a personal hand she had never seen before. And at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, 2 items she had not expected. The first was a set of keys she didn't recognize. The second was a copy of the bloodline document. Not the original. The original was with Orin, but a transcription, done carefully by hand on fresh paper. Someone had read the document and copied it before it was moved. She looked at the copy and understood what it meant. Harwick had known the document existed long before Serena started researching. He had found it first. He had made a copy and left the original in place because destroying it would raise questions, and because as long as Serena didn't know the document existed, keeping the original buried served his purposes better than burning it. The moment she found it, the calculation changed. Harwick had been prepared for exactly this moment for longer than she had been looking. She heard footsteps on the tower stairs, too heavy for one person, moving with the controlled urgency of men on a mission rather than men on a routine. She grabbed the record book and the copy and shoved them inside her vest, left the chest where it was with the rest of the contents, and positioned herself against the wall beside the door. 3 men came through. Not Harwick. Guards, but not the castle guards she recognized. Outer perimeter soldiers in standard gear, which was wrong because outer perimeter soldiers had no business in the South Tower interior. They scanned the room and the first one's eyes found the open chest, and he said one word, clipped and hard. "She's here." Serena moved. She had one good arm and a heart that was misfiring in a way that sent white noise through her vision when she pushed hard, and she used everything she had left. She drove her right elbow into the closest man's windpipe, the specific deliberate strike that the border warriors had taught her when she was 18, the one that doesn't require weight or leverage, just precision. And he went down choking. The second man grabbed her from behind, and she let her knees drop so his grip slid up to her shoulders, and she drove the back of her head into his face, felt the impact, heard him curse in a way that meant his nose. The third one hit her from the side. She went down. The stone floor was exactly as hard as stone floors are. She landed on her right side, the functional side, and the impact to her ribs was the kind that takes your breath with mechanical completeness. No air in, no air out, just the body's stunned pause before it decides whether to continue. Her stitched wound had not opened. She knew because she'd have felt it, but the pressure was enormous. She got up. Not fast, not clean. The way people get up when their body is arguing against it. One knee, one foot, using the wall because the wall was there, and pride was a luxury for people who weren't running out of functional systems. She got up. The third guard was reaching for her again. Aldrich came through the door. It was not a complicated intervention. Aldrich was a man built for exactly this kind of close quarters work, and he had 2 of his soldiers with him, and the 3 outer perimeter guards were taken down in the next 90 seconds with the blunt, workmanlike efficiency of people who have been trained and are now doing what they were trained for. Serena leaned against the wall and breathed. "Harwick," she said when she had enough breath. "Council chamber," Aldrich said. He was looking at her with the contained, specific tension of a man who wants to tell someone to sit down and knows better. "He called an emergency session 20 minutes ago. Darius is in there." She pushed off the wall. "Luna? How far?" He looked at her face for 1 second. Then he turned and led the way. The council chamber was on the main floor, the formal room used for territorial sessions and pack business. High ceilings, long table, the alpha seat at the head, and the council seats flanking it. Seating for visiting alphas along the far wall. The room was built for authority, for the weight and spectacle of decisions being made by people who had the power to make them matter. Serena heard Harwick's voice before she reached the door. "Cannot continue to allow the Luna's behavior to go unaddressed. She has violated the healer's orders. She has entered restricted castle areas without authorization. She assaulted a member of the Alpha's household. The instability she represents is exactly what we have been attempting to contain." She opened the door. The council chamber had Darius at the head of the table, Harwick to his right, 4 additional council members ranged along the sides, and 2 of Harwick's preferred administrative staff standing near the far wall. Everyone looked at her when the door opened. She walked to the center of the room. She was aware of how she looked. The dead arm, the set of her jaw, the sweat and the uneven breathing, and the specific quality of a woman who has been through the last 18 hours and is still vertical. She let them look. She pulled the record book and the copied document from inside her vest and set them on the table in front of Darius. "Harwick's contingency chest," she said. Her voice was steady. "South Tower, 2nd level. Your outer perimeter soldiers tried to recover it after I found it. Aldrich has those men in custody." She looked at Harwick. "This record book is in your hand. I need a writing sample to verify, but I don't think you're going to make that necessary." She looked at the gathered council. "This is a 6-month record of information sold to competing territorial interests. Pack defensive positions, alliance weaknesses, resource vulnerabilities, the full internal map of the Northern Territories given to parties who intend to acquire it by controlled destabilization. The room was extremely quiet. Harwick's face was the face of a man running a very fast calculation. "This woman is compromised," he said. "She's been poisoned." "Cold root extract," Serena said, "applied by Vanessa Draven, who is in the Luna quarters under effective detention. The extract is a paralytic, not a cognitive impairment. Everything I'm telling you right now I can verify, and you know I can verify it, which is why you sent 3 men to that storage room." She looked at Darius. He was looking at the record book with the expression of a man in the specific moment before something breaks. "Open it," she said. "Page 12. The entry dated 4 months ago. It lists the Eastern Offensive route and timetable, the route that was supposed to be known only to you and the Senior Patrol Command." Darius opened the book. He found the page. He read it. What happened in his face in the next 3 seconds was not something Serena had seen before. Not rage she had seen from him, the controlled cold kind and the hot unconstrained kind both. This was something that happened below rage, in the older and less managed layer where a man who has built his entire identity on being the most dangerous thing in any room discovers that he has been handled, methodically and patiently, by someone sitting 3 feet from him for 11 years. It was the look of a foundation giving. Harwick read it too. He moved fast, faster than a 62-year-old man had any right to move, with the specific speed of someone who has planned and rehearsed exactly this moment. He was out of his seat and had the record book in his hands before anyone at the table processed that he was moving, and he had a blade out from somewhere inside his jacket, and he had positioned himself with his back to the wall and the blade and the book both raised. "Everyone stay seated," he said. Nobody moved. "The book goes with me," he said. "I walk out of this castle and you'll never hear from me again. Stop me, and everything in here gets burned before your eyes, and you'll spend the next decade trying to prove what I've done without the evidence to do it." Darius stood. He stood slowly, with the deliberate quality of a man choosing each movement as a statement of intent. He was larger than Harwick by a significant margin, built by decades of physical dominance, and the way he rose from the chair had the quality of something seismic being set in motion. "You're not leaving this room," Darius said. "You can't stop me without—" "I know what you've done." His voice was very quiet. The quietest register he had, which meant the most dangerous one. The voice that existed only when he had moved entirely past the performative aspects of authority and was operating from the actual core of it. "I know what you fed them, and I know how long you've been doing it, and I know what you are going to let happen to this pack." He stepped away from the alpha seat, moving into the open space of the chamber. "And I know what you let happen to my mate." Harwick's eyes cut to Serena and back. That was Vanessa. Vanessa needed inside intelligence to time that attack precisely. She needed the Luna's schedule and her route, and the confirmation that the Meadow interception would work. She needed someone to authorize the arrest without going through standard council procedure. She needed someone to move the witnesses before morning. Darius kept walking toward him, slow and measured, and the thing in his face was past anger now into something colder and more absolute. "That was you. Every operational piece that required inside access. That was you." Harwick raised the blade. Darius didn't stop. This was the thing about men who had spent their lives as the most dangerous thing in any room. They had a particular relationship to physical threat that was not bravery in the conventional sense. Bravery implied overcoming fear. This was something different. This was the accumulated certainty of a man who had been tested enough times that the sight of a blade raised at him registered as a problem to be solved rather than a thing to be afraid of. He walked into the blade's range. Harwick's hand moved. Darius took the cut across his left shoulder with the completeness of someone who had calculated that the cut was acceptable and the outcome was not negotiable. He hit Harwick with his right arm. Not a punch, a drive, the full weight of his body behind the forearm strike, and Harwick went into the wall hard enough to rattle the sconces, and the record book hit the floor, and the blade clattered into the far corner. Serena crossed the room in 4 steps and picked up the book. She stood there with the book in her one functional hand and the dead arm at her side, and her heart doing its irregular stuttering work in her chest, and she looked at Darius on his feet with blood running down his left arm, and Harwick on the floor against the wall, and the council members around the table who had not moved. She looked at each of them in turn. "Every piece of evidence is now in custody," she said. Her voice filled the room without effort, the voice she had developed over 7 years of making herself heard in spaces designed to amplify the authority of others. The record book, the original lineage document, the forged letters, the testimony of the witnesses to my arrest, the letter recovered from the rogue operative with Vanessa Draven's seal. She paused. "This council will convene a formal territorial session. Every alpha in the northern system will be notified, and every piece of what was done to this pack, and to me, will be presented in full." She looked at Harwick on the floor. He was breathing hard, bleeding from the temple where his head had met the wall. His eyes were still calculating, still running options, still the eyes of a man who had spent 11 years finding angles in every situation. She held his gaze. "There are no more angles," she said. She turned to leave. Darius's voice stopped her. "Serena." She turned. He was still standing in the center of the chamber, the blood from his shoulder making its way down his arm to his hand, and he was looking at her with an expression she did not have a clean name for. Not guilt. They were past guilt. Not appeal. Something rawer than either. The face of a man standing in the full wreckage of his own choices with no performance left to put over them. "I know," she said. "Not now." She walked out of the council chamber with the record book against her chest and her dead arm at her side, and in the corridor outside she stopped and put her back against the wall and let herself breathe. Her heart was still misfiring. The numbness was still climbing, nearly to her shoulder now. The stitched wound ached with a persistence that had graduated from background to foreground. She was running on something she did not have a precise word for. Not adrenaline, which had the quality of a fire that burns fast and leaves ash. This was slower burning, a refusal that had moved past the emotional into the physiological, something in her cells that simply would not agree to stop. She thought about Vanessa's smile in the Luna quarters, the specific quality of it, not triumphant, but waiting, as though the smile was positioned for an outcome that had not yet arrived. She thought about the keys in the chest, the ones she didn't recognize, the ones she had not had time to examine. She straightened up. The castle above her was in organized motion now. Aldrich's people, Darius's direct soldiers, the secured perimeter that was closing around the South Tower, and the Luna quarters simultaneously. The formal machinery of a pack locking down a compromised situation. It had the sound of a structure that knew what it was doing. She turned back toward the Luna quarters. She needed to look at those keys. She needed to understand why Vanessa, who had every reason to run and no remaining operational utility in staying, had chosen to still be in that room when Serena walked in. She had been waiting. The keys were the answer to what she had been waiting for. Serena moved through the corridor and felt the cold root working its way toward her shoulder, and kept moving because there was a piece of this she had not found yet, and she could feel its absence the way you feel a wrong note in a song you know by heart. She turned the corner toward the Luna quarters and stopped. The door was open. The 2 soldiers Darius had posted outside it were on the floor. Not dead, breathing, both of them, but down with the specific bonelessness of men who had been hit with something fast-acting. She checked the nearest one's pulse. Strong. Whatever had been used on them was designed to incapacitate, not kill. She straightened and looked at the open door. Inside the room, empty. The crown still on the dressing table. The broken shards of the clay vessels still on the floor. Vanessa's traveling cases, the ones Serena had not noticed earlier because she had been focused on other things, open and half-emptied. She had been packing. The keys were not in the chest by accident. They were not Harwick's. They were Vanessa's insurance, the keys to whatever exit she had arranged for herself, positioned in Harwick's chest, because she had known that if the operation failed, the castle would lock down. And the only person who could retrieve those keys without being searched was Harwick, or someone who knew exactly where Harwick's contingency was hidden. Someone like Serena. Serena had retrieved the keys and left them in the open chest, and someone had gone to that chest after she left. She turned and ran. The South Tower stairs. She took them 2 at a time with her one good arm out for balance and her heart hammering its arrhythmic protest in her chest, and she came through the door into the storage room and the chest was still where she'd left it, and the keys were gone. And through the narrow slit window of the South Tower she could see the outer courtyard, And in the outer courtyard, a figure in a dark traveling cloak was moving fast toward the eastern gate, with the specific purpose of a person who knows exactly where they are going and has already accounted for every obstacle between them and gone. Serena's lungs burned. She looked at the window, too narrow to pass through. She looked at the door. She calculated the distance to the eastern gate against the pace of the figure and the time it would take her to get from this tower to the ground level and across the courtyard. She did the math. And then she did something she had not done in 7 years of carefully calibrated, politically precise steadiness above all management of the most dangerous pack in the Northern Territories. She opened her mouth and she screamed Aldrich's name at the top of her lungs through the tower window. The sound tore the courtyard open. The figure below broke into a run. And in the eastern corridor, 40 feet from the gate, Vanessa Draven hit a wall of Aldrich's soldiers who had heard the scream and did not need to be told twice. Serena leaned against the window frame and breathed. Her heart was misfiring badly now, each beat arriving with the irregular delay of something working past its design parameters. The numbness had reached her shoulder. She could feel the edges of her vision doing something she did not like. She held on to the window frame. Below, in the courtyard, Aldrich's soldiers had Vanessa on her knees in the dirt, and Vanessa was not struggling, and she was looking up at the South Tower window with an expression that Serena, even from this distance, could read clearly. Not defeat. Not yet. Just the recalibration of someone who has lost this move but has not finished counting the board. And Serena looked down at her from the window with her dead arm and her failing heart and the record book still pressed against her chest. And she thought about the packed traveling cases and the keys and the soldiers on the floor outside the Luna quarters, and she understood that what she had stopped just now was not the end of Vanessa Draven's operation. It was one branch of it. Somewhere outside these walls, the Draven network was still running. Somewhere the people who had funded 8 months of precise, patient, castle-penetrating conspiracy were still operational, and they would know within hours, that the Northern Pack had survived the first attempt. The first attempt. She put her right hand flat against the wall and held herself upright and looked down at the courtyard where the woman who had ordered her child's death was being pulled to her feet in the dirt. The cold thing in her chest that had no name settled deeper. She was not done. She had barely started. Petra found her on the South Tower stairs. Not collapsed. Serena had not collapsed, had not permitted herself to collapse, had made it down 2 full flights before her legs decided the negotiation was over, and she sat down on a step with her back against the cold stone wall and her right hand pressed flat to her sternum, feeling her heart do its wrong-timed work. She was sitting there, very deliberately sitting, rather than falling, when Petra came up the stairs with her kit and the specific expression of a healer who has been doing this long enough to have stopped being surprised by the condition people find themselves in. Petra sat down 1 step below her and took her pulse without asking permission. "How long?" she said. 20 minutes since the vessel broke. Maybe 25. "You ran on it?" "Yes." Petra looked at her with the eyes of a woman who had spent 40 years choosing between saying what she thought and saying what would help. She chose, as she usually did, the latter. "You're going to lie down right here for 5 minutes," she said. "Not because I'm asking. Because if your heart doesn't regulate in the next 10 minutes, you'll be unconscious for the rest of the afternoon and you won't be present for anything that needs you present." Serena looked at her. 5 minutes, she said. 5 minutes. She lay down on the stairs. The stone was cold against her shoulder blades, and the ceiling of the stairwell was rough-cut and water-stained and utterly without comfort, and she stared at it and felt her heart doing its arrhythmic protest and breathed in the slow, deliberate pattern that Petra indicated with her hand. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. She breathed. She thought about nothing in particular. She had been running calculations for 48 hours without a break, and her mind had reached the specific exhaustion that lives past ordinary tiredness, the place where the machinery keeps moving because stopping would cost too much. But the quality of the movement has changed. Slower. Raw. Less filtered. She thought about the child. Let herself think about it directly, which she had not done until now. Not the loss as a tactical complication, not the loss as evidence of what had been done to her, but the actual fact of it. 8 weeks, a winter child, something that had been real and had stopped being real in a cell while drums played overhead. She held that thought without managing it, and felt the grief open along the edges she had been keeping sealed for 2 days. It was not a clean feeling. It was not cathartic in the way that stories sometimes made grief sound, some great releasing wave that clears the air. It was just heavy, the specific heaviness of something that was going to be present for a long time, woven into the ordinary texture of days, and the only honest relationship with it was to acknowledge its weight, rather than find a way to put it down. She breathed, her heart steadied, not fully, not all at once, but the stuttering quality of it shifted, the intervals between beats becoming more regular, the pressure in her throat easing by degrees. She felt it happen the way you feel a storm system moving, the specific change in atmospheric pressure that tells you the worst of it has passed, even before the sky clears. "Better?" Petra said, her finger still on the pulse point. "Better?" Serena confirmed. She sat up. Petra did not try to stop her. "The arm will come back in 4 to 5 hours," Petra said. "There will be pins and needles first, then aching, then normal sensation. Don't try to use it before the aching phase." She paused. "The stitches held. You have a remarkable talent for doing inadvisable things without tearing your stitches." Years of practice. Petra looked at her for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry for what happened in that cell." The words landed in the stairwell and sat there. Serena looked at her hands, the one that worked, the one that didn't. "Thank you," she said. She stood up and kept moving. The formal territorial session was called for the following morning, which gave Serena 12 hours. She used them. She spent the first 2 with Aldrich, going through Harwick's record book page by page with Kyle, taking notes, and 2 of the senior patrol commanders present as witnesses. The record was more complete than she had hoped and more damaging than she had feared. 11 years of incremental information transfer, small enough in each individual instance to be dismissed as coincidence, large enough in aggregate to constitute a systematic dismantling of the Northern Pact's strategic opacity. Every defensive advantage Darius had built, every alliance relationship he had cultivated, every territorial negotiation he had conducted with the assumption of confidentiality had been visible to the Draven network as it happened. The Draven estate had not been a mid-tier landholding family with good land and beautiful women. It had been an intelligence operation with a 40-year history, patient enough to play territorial acquisition across generations, embedding operatives in positions of trust and waiting for the right moment to convert accumulated information into leverage. Vanessa was not the first. The record book referenced predecessors, careful, oblique references that nonetheless traced a methodology. Find the right access point. Cultivate the right relationship. Wait. Serena read through it and felt something adjacent to admiration, in the way you can recognize the craft in a thing designed to destroy you. She spent the next 3 hours in the archive with Orin, going through the founding histories with the lineage document open beside them, building the complete evidentiary record of the Moon Guardian bloodline and its connection to the Pact's territorial covenant. Orin worked with the meticulous focus of a man who had waited a long time for this particular work to be necessary, annotating and cross-referencing with the specific satisfaction of someone whose years of solitary scholarship had turned out to matter. "You always knew it was there," she said at one point. "I suspected," he said. "I found the original reference 30 years ago and couldn't verify it. When you started asking questions, I went back to it." He turned a page with careful hands. "I thought it might be important." "It was important." He looked at her over the document. "You are the rightful Luna of this pack, not because of a marriage or a title. You understand that." "I understand it," she said. "Does it change what you want?" She thought about this honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. "Not what I want," she said. "What I'm willing to accept." He nodded, the nod of a man who understood exactly what she meant. She spent the remaining hours preparing the formal presentation for the territorial session, not the emotional case. She had never relied on emotion as a primary instrument in council settings, not because she lacked it, but because she had learned early that in rooms full of powerful people, emotion was what they were waiting for you to display so they could use it as evidence against the argument. She built the factual case instead, layer by layer, documented and cross-referenced, the kind of presentation that left no space for alternative interpretation. She did not sleep. The territorial session opened at mid-morning with 8 Alpha representatives from across the northern system present, summoned by Darius's dispatch riders overnight. They came in fast, which told Serena that the darkening of the boundary markers and the dead grain fields had already reached them. They were not merely attending a pack political crisis. They were attending the first signs of a territorial breakdown that threatened all of them. They sat at the long table, and Serena stood at the end of it and presented the evidence. She was precise. She was complete. She gave them the record book, the lineage document, the forged letters, the testimony record from Aldrich and Kael, the chemical analysis Petra had documented of the cold route vessel. She gave them Harwick's operational history and the Draven Network's 40-year methodology. She gave them everything, in order, without performance. When she was done, the room was very quiet. One of the visiting alphas, an older woman from the Northwestern Territories who had been governing her pack for 30 years, and had the eyes of someone who had stopped being surprised by human capacity for betrayal some years back, looked at Harwick, who was present under guard, and then at Vanessa, also present under guard, and then at Serena. "You're the last bloodline carrier," she said. "According to the founding document and the supporting lineage record, yes. And you were in that cell for 11 hours without medical attention, losing a pregnancy, while a woman with no bloodline claim wore the Luna crown." "Yes." The Alpha looked at Darius. Darius was seated at the head of his own table, which was the right positioning for an Alpha at a territorial session, and he had not spoken except to formally open the session and introduce the matter. His shoulder had been dressed, the cut from Harwick's blade, clean and closed now, the bandaging visible above his collar. He looked like what he was, a man who had been dismantled and was sitting in the ruins of it in front of 8 of his territorial peers. "Alpha Thorn," the Northwestern Alpha said. "What is your formal response to this record?" Darius looked at the table in front of him. Then he looked up and looked at Serena across the length of the room. She held his gaze without expression, not coldly, without offering him anything, which was different. "Everything she has presented is accurate," he said. "The failure of governance represented in this record is mine. I accepted information from a compromised source without verification. I acted against my mate without due process. I allowed a conspiracy to operate inside this castle for 8 months without recognizing it, in part because I did not want to recognize it." He paused. "There is no response to that record that mitigates it. It stands as it is." The room was quiet for a moment. Then the council's formal judgment began, and it was neither quick nor gentle, and Serena stood through all of it with her back straight and her dead arm at her side and the cold, precise thing in her chest, and she watched 7 years of a kingdom accounting for itself. Harwick's sentence was rendered 3 days later, after the full council deliberation. Stripped of title, stripped of land, remanded to territorial custody pending the formal investigation into the Draven Network's reach across the northern system. The investigation would take months and would find things that would require years to fully address. This was understood by everyone in the room, and no one pretended otherwise. Vanessa's sentence came the day after. Exile. Permanent. Beyond the frozen northern borders where the territories ended and the unmapped wilderness began and no pack charter held. No shelter from any affiliated pack. No possibility of return. She was brought into the council chamber for the formal pronouncement, and she stood between 2 guards with the composure she had worn through everything. Not broken, not diminished, but recalibrated in the specific way of someone who has played a long game and lost it and has already begun calculating the next one. Serena looked at her from across the room. Vanessa looked back. "You could have just left," Serena said. It was not an accusation. It was something more like genuine inquiry. The thing she had been turning over for 3 days, the operational question underneath the personal one. 8 months of access. You could have taken what you needed and walked. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "The compact had to break," she said. "Not just be documented. The bloodline had to be displaced. That was the condition of the network's larger operation." She looked at Serena with the specific directness of a person who has decided honesty costs nothing now. "You weren't a person I needed to harm. You were a bloodline I needed to displace. The distinction mattered to me." "It didn't change what you did." "No," Vanessa said. "It didn't." She was taken out. Serena stood in the empty council chamber afterward for a long time, alone, and looked at the Alpha seat at the head of the table and the Luna position beside it, and the space the room had been built to organize and contain. She thought about Vanessa's distinction. You weren't a person I needed to harm. You were a bloodline I needed to displace. She thought about how often power operated that way. Not with malice toward individuals, but with the cold functionality of systems that required certain obstacles removed and did not invest in the nature of those obstacles. She thought about what it meant to be reduced to a function, a bloodline, a positional piece in someone else's territorial calculation. She thought about 7 years of being the steadying force, the measured voice, the Luna who never showed her teeth unless the pack needed someone to bleed. She thought about the woman who had sat in the dark in a chain-bolted cell and eaten bread and thought clearly. That woman had always been present. She had simply been spending most of her available energy maintaining a version of herself that the room required. She did not regret the 7 years. The work had been real. The pack was better for it specifically and measurably, and that was not nothing. But she understood now that the work had been built on a foundation she had accepted as more solid than it was, the assumption that her position was secured by demonstrated value, when in fact it had been secured only by the ongoing willingness of a powerful man to recognize that value. The moment that willingness was manipulated, she had lost everything. She was not going to build on that foundation again. Darius found her still there. He came in without staff, which was a choice. He could have sent someone, could have created the buffer of protocol around what he needed to say, and he hadn't. He walked to the center of the room and stopped, and he looked at her, and the look on his face was the one she had seen in the council chamber and had not let herself fully absorb then. She absorbed it now. "I have spoken to the council," he said. "The formal recommendation has been made, and I have accepted it. I am stepping down from the Alpha position." She looked at him. "There will be a formal transition period," he said. "The council will govern the administrative functions until the territorial compact can be fully restored through your bloodline claim. The legal structure for that is already being drafted." He paused. "I have recommended to every Alpha present that your claim to the Luna sovereignty be recognized not as a provisional position or a transitional one, but as the primary governance authority, full and independent." The room was quiet for a long time. "Darius," she said. "I know what I'm asking you to hear," he said. "I know what it costs. I'm not asking you to receive it as reparation because it isn't reparation. Nothing I do from this point is going to recalibrate what happened in that cell." He held her eyes. "I'm asking you to hear it as a man telling you the truth about what he should have known 7 years ago and didn't let himself know. That you were never the Luna of this pack because of me. You were the Luna of this pack because you were always meant to be, and I was too arrogant and too blind to understand the difference." She stood in the council chamber and she let that land. It did not fix anything. She had not expected it to fix anything, and the part of her that was honest recognized that she would have trusted it less if it had arrived with the shape of a solution. It landed as what it was. A true thing, said plainly, by a man who had finally stopped managing the conversation. "What will you do?" she said. "I don't know yet. I'll go north for a time. There's work on the outer territories that doesn't require an Alpha seat, the kind of border work that mostly requires showing up and doing it." He looked at his hands. "I'm good at showing up and doing work. I was less good at seeing who was doing it beside me." She looked at him. The man she had spent 7 years beside for all that had been real in it and all that had failed in it. The specific human complexity of someone who was neither the villain the last 3 days had made easy to construct, nor the Alpha she had believed in with a loyalty that had exceeded the evidence. Something in between. Something genuinely flawed in the way that only real people are flawed. Not cartoonishly, but in the specific, unglamorous way of a person who had made their worst choices out of the ordinary human ingredients of pride and distraction and the comfortable weight of being believed in more than you'd been tested. She did not forgive him. That was not the right word for what was present in her. Forgiveness implied a restoration, a returning to a prior state, and there was no prior state available. What was present instead was something more complicated and perhaps more lasting. The understanding that she could carry what had been done to her without letting it become the primary architecture of who she was going forward. That the cell and the chains and the night she had spent bleeding in the dark could be true and fully accounted for without being the whole story. She had not been broken in that cell. She had been made into the shape she was always going to have to become. "Go north," she said. "Do the work. Come back when you understand what you're coming back to." He nodded. He left. The months that followed had the texture of construction, not rebuilding. Rebuilding implied you were restoring a prior structure, and Serena was not interested in restoring anything. She was building something different with the same materials, and the difference mattered. The new council was built on a principle she articulated in the first formal session in plain and specific language: loyalty to the pack's people, not to the pack's alpha position. The distinction required ongoing enforcement and ongoing attention, and it was not a principle that powerful institutions adopted without friction, but it was a principle she was prepared to defend every single time it was tested, and it was tested regularly. The grain fields recovered, not immediately. That would have been too clean, too fast, too much like a story that resolved according to audience expectation rather than actual agricultural and ecological reality. They recovered in the way that damaged systems recover, which is to say slowly, with setbacks, requiring sustained attention and unglamorous work. By the time the first full harvest came in under the restored covenant, it had taken 4 months and 3 failed partial recoveries, and the specific patient labor of a pack learning to trust its own foundations again. She rode the outer territories regularly, the same way she always had. The settlements that had grown up knowing her as a presence, the young wolves in the border communities, the farmers and the patrol families and the healers, she kept showing up, because showing up was what she had always believed mattered most, and the last several months had not changed that belief. If anything, they had deepened it. Oren died in the autumn, quietly, in his archive rooms, with his notes organized and a letter addressed to Serena and his characteristic precise script left on the table beside him. She read it alone and did not share its contents with anyone, because it was private in the way that real things are private, and some things do not require witness. She carried it with her. She was standing at the northern boundary on the night the wolf spirits returned. She had not planned to be there specifically. She had been riding the perimeter inspection with Aldrich and 3 of the patrol scouts, the routine evening work of a governing authority that believed in knowing its own borders, and they had come to the northern markers as the sky was going from gray to black and the first stars were appearing. The markers had been dark since Vanessa's investiture. They were not dark now. The light that came up through the carved stone was silver white and slow, the specific quality of something returning from a long distance rather than being switched on. It built over the course of several minutes, and the air around the markers changed, warmer, or perhaps it was not warmer, but simply present in a way it had not been. The distinction between the hollow quality of empty winter air and air that had something alive in it. Aldrich stood beside her and said nothing, which was exactly right. She put her right hand on the nearest marker stone. The warmth under her palm was not imaginary and was not metaphorical. It was the specific sensory fact of stone that had been cold for months meeting a hand that carried something the stone recognized. She stood there for a long time. She was not the same woman who had sat in that cell and eaten bread in the dark. She was also not a different woman. That framing never quite worked. The before and after architecture that made trauma into a transformation story as though suffering were an educational program with a credential at the end. She was the same woman with a more complete knowledge of herself, and the completeness had been expensive, and she was not going to pretend the cost had been worth it or that she would have chosen it. No honest person chose this kind of education. What she knew now that she had only partially known before. She did not require anyone's ongoing willingness to recognize her for the thing she was to continue being it. That recognition was pleasant when it came, and its absence was painful when it didn't, and neither of those facts were the foundation. The foundation was older and ran deeper than any of it, older than the marriage and the council sessions and the 7 years of careful, measured, throat-biting steadiness. It was in the records in Oren's archive and in the stone under her palm and in the way the ancient compact had held its breath and waited, for however long it needed to, for the right hands to come back to it. She had been in a cell in the dark, and she had thought clearly. That was the thing. That was the part that could not be taken. Not by Harwick's intelligence operation, or Vanessa's cold root, or Darius's blindness, or the loss of the child she would mourn for years in the particular quiet way that losses like that are mourned, underneath everything, ongoing, without resolution, just present. She had thought clearly in the dark, and she had gotten up, and she had kept moving. That was enough. That was, in the end, the only thing that had ever been required of her, and the only thing that no external authority had ever actually had the power to grant or revoke. Aldrich said, finally, "The marks are holding." Yes, she said. All of them. The scouts are reporting from the eastern and western boundaries. All of them. She looked out at the territory, dark and cold and enormous, running to the tree lines and beyond them, to the plains and the settlements and the outer communities where people were living their lives inside the protection she had come back to restore. She looked at all of it for a long time. Good, she said. She took her hand off the stone. She turned her horse toward home.